Welcome to Women of Steel with me, Miriam Grace, the podcast where women who've had their mettle tested help us make important links for ourselves. I talk to remarkable women about their lives and challenges through the lens of my own work as a psychotherapist. We uncover stories which challenge the power of the status quo and validate the voices of marginalised or disadvantaged women. Grace Quantock is an award-winning psychotherapeutic counsellor, speaker and author, and she has lived experience and political perspectives to bring to us in her book, Living Well with Chronic Illness, Write Your Own Roadmap to Healing in Tough Times. Currently living and thriving with often debilitating illness, Grace is the real deal and knows firsthand the emotional and physical roller coaster that accompanies diagnosis and life struggle. Grace helps other marginalised folks to live well with pain, illness and trauma without disembodiment, burnout or blame. When I read her new book, which came out in September 2024, I couldn't wait to share her perspectives with you on this podcast. Welcome, Grace. Thank you so much for making time to have this conversation with me. I've been thinking, as this topic of chronic illness has come up quite a lot in the media recently, how much I wanted to talk to you about certain things that I've experienced, and I know that you've experienced when recently, the lovely, wonderful Miranda Hart, I do love her, has been talking about her experience of chronic illness and of fatigue and so on. And I was going to ask you, whether you've picked up any of that and what your thoughts and responses are.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it was on Women's Hour, wasn't it? It's fantastic and incredibly powerful. And I think there's something so powerful for many people about hearing somebody, especially somebody, that we could really admire in the public eye, sharing those experiences that mirror your own, especially those that often aren't heard and aren't seen. Of course, we all go through different things. You and I aren't celebrities, we're going to have a different experience, but it does highlight like the lack of role models and visibility we often have around these things. But what I was really aware of was, although her interview, covered a lot, I really noticed afterwards when it was reported in places like on the BBC and things, a lot of one of the quotes that kept getting pulled out everywhere was, it was walking and getting outside that really did help. And I've got to admit, that just hit me. I just thought, oh no, are we really again? Because that's going back over reinforcing this idea of this myth of ME, of other chronic fatigue illnesses or illnesses that involve fatigue like long COVID being quote unquote psychological, and it being this idea that actually just getting outside and just going for a good walk and just cheering yourself up and just getting fit, that will make a difference. When actually we know that it can often cause relapse, it can cause huge amounts of difficulty, it can risk post-exertion illness. It's something that people are under huge pressure to do when they often know that they need to pace. Because honestly, if getting out and walking worked, then we would all already have done it and none of us would be sick anymore.
Absolutely.
It's much more complex than that. I know I was doing a little bit of outside exercise a couple of months ago after a period of not doing as much because I was, finishing and then launching my book, and it was like everything was just book. And so I was like, it's a lovely day, I'm going to see about some outside wheelchair movement. And my pacing with my Visible app, I went kind of way out, and I hadn't realized during the time. And I was speaking to a family member, and I said, well, the benefit of you for going outside and exercise, that'll outweigh that. I said, right, but that's not true. Because if that was the case, if the benefit of being outside and moving outweighed the impact, then I would just move every day and I would never get sicker.
Yes.
And and I'd be better already, because that's not how so it's a lovely idea that, but it's okay because, nature and moving and getting out for a good walk, it feels like common sense. It feels like it's intuitive that will work. Was actually what a lot of people need is rest, is pacing, is a pain management plan, is adapted housing so that they can do day-to-day tasks without using all their energy, so that then they can use some of their energy for outside movement. And all of those are really often complex, difficult things to put in place. So people often default to just go for a good walk.
Yes, and I think some of what you say in your book is that this idea of finding answers all the time then places the responsibility for the disability, being disabled, on the person who's sick, not on not on it being a community problem.
Yes, absolutely, exactly. And so I always look at where these things are placed. So when we're telling a story, when we're discussing something, where is the power in that? And often we kind of, in these discussions, the power is put in that individual. So said to see, well, you can just do this, or you can try that. And I think, and the thing is, at the beginning, that feels empowering, right? Because you think, oh gosh, maybe I could just do that. Gosh, okay. But actually, it's often complex and difficult, or multiple factors involved: emotional factors, financial factors, social issues that are part of it. And so, but they're all really often very difficult to fix, and it's harder to kind of just give advice around that. And I think there was a program I was on once, and they said something like, what's the biggest thing that would make a difference to your health in the next week? The coach asked me. And I said, a change in government. That would make the biggest difference to my health at the time. And they were a bit stumped. And I said, I'm sorry, were you expecting me to say, eat more green vegetables or go for a brisk walk every day? So, no, actually, I think not having austerity, I think having benefits at a level that has reached inflation and supports people to be able to actually access them. I think, fixing the potholes, councils are fully funded so they can fund social care so that I can get care, and we can do things like fix the potholes in the roads, and we have an NHS that's fully supported and actually able to function as it's intended to, without just draining everybody and everything around it, because the medics are so overworked, the patients are so exhausted. That actually would make a larger difference to me. But again, I'm not saying eating, I love my green smoothies, but I won't agree with an idea that me drinking green smoothies is going to fix all the issues. I want to think about the things that are outside of my control, but then how I navigate given that they're the case. But I won't be part of pretending that it's all under my control. And I always think when somebody kind of says it's within my power, I always think, well, that's really interesting. In the nicest possible way, who is that letting off the hook?
Yes.
If I take this as my personal responsibility, I think, gosh, well, it probably really is me. I probably do need to try harder. And gosh, and if I did that, then does that let this social care off the hook because they've changed their criteria and they said they'll come and take me to the toilet once a day, and I said that's not acceptable, and we had an argument about it.
Yes, yeah. And I think in talking to you, I've made quite a few personal steps forward just in knowing you, because I think your experience is longer as being a disabled person than mine, and I'm just aware of how much I've internalized in talking to you, because the last time you and I had a chat, it was the day I had just left work, and I don't know if you remember, but I said something like I'd not planned on giving a speech, but I was suddenly in this position where the person next to me had given their speech, so I sort of felt I should come up with something, and so what comes out is obviously what's most familiar, or what's a not thought through. And I said something about, how my my work-life balance would mean that now I could do my daily physio, and I could do this. And so it somehow almost became a justification of I'm going to try really hard to get well. I'm going to use my time to get well and be a really good disabled person, and try really hard not to be a disabled person, and for other people's comfort and convenience. Obviously, I'd love to not be disabled. I'd love to be able to do many of the things that I so painfully miss doing, but this was about, for me, was how to interact with the other. I feel othered, and how do I sort of explain and apologise for my difference. So part of what you said to me that was, it was quite shocking when I'd never heard it said, you see, because this is the thing about visibility. You were saying about, disability visibility, is that no one has ever said to me, it's okay to use your energy. You said, I don't have to use my energy trying to learn to walk again. I could use it doing a PhD or lying in bed eating bonbons, you said. It's like my choice, they're my spoons. And, that felt really countercultural and really anarchic. So I'd love for you to say a little bit more about that, because that was quite, that was a paradigm shift for me, or that was a way of seeing things completely differently from my internalized ableism. So yeah, tell me a little bit more about how I'm allowed to use my spoons any way I want to use them.
Yes, absolutely. I know that is normally my phrase. It normally involves you could do X, Y, and Z. You can, spend your time sitting by the river. You can spend your time masturbating. You can spend your time lying in bed and eating bonbons. You can do what you please. It's absolutely up to us. So I think, as you say, there's huge amounts of pressure on being a quote unquote good disabled person. It's huge. But here's the thing. It doesn't end. You can't win it. So even if you recover, quote unquote, you then have to, tell everybody else how you recovered, and then you have to go back and help everybody else recover too, because we shouldn't have, because of course, if you've done it, then you've got to get everybody else to do it, regardless of the fact that whether that's your journey and you have the resources or the capacity that other people may or may not have. And there's so much pressure on, trying to apologize for needing adaptions, or apologize for being sick, and compensating and needing to be this good disabled person to make up for the fact that, I'm X, Y, and Z, or I need X, Y, and Z. And sometimes we are in spaces where there is very little tolerance for us. So, there is almost a requirement for compensation, that for tolerance in that spaces, we are needing to outperform non-disabled people. Just like in many spaces, the institutional and personal racism means that there's such a higher expectation of people of colour in those places. They have no, there's no allowance for just normal humanity. Everything has to be exceptional to justify their presence in the spaces, because they're already seen as interlopers in the spaces because of the racism. And we can have something with ableism where it's already seen as kind of massively, people sometimes see themselves as massively kind to already be tolerating us, but then we have to kind of, sing for our supper and absolutely make sure we prove that we're justifying and showing that we're definitely there. But we can just be human like everybody else. This is just a part of being human. This is a part of conditions, and all that pressure. I think there's often a huge drive behind it to get to a level of acceptance. But do we actually want that acceptance? Do you want to join the kind of ableist white supremacy elite? Is that the plan? And so sometimes people, it is, right. There's a whiteness can be a hell of a drug. There's this proximity to it that confers protection, that confers privilege and support and all of these things. But is that really what we're wanting to align with?
Yeah. Yes. And I think that there's something about I'm thinking about reasonable adjustments, for example, and there might be law. It might be law to make reasonable adjustments, but there is, like you say, this compensating, overcompensating, making, in my case, certainly making myself more fatigued, more stressed, and I'm thinking about masking, and I'm also thinking about coming out. So masking, I tend to think of in terms of neurodiverse people, and coming out, I tend to think of sexual minorities, but it's the same process for me. In fact, I quite often say coming out about my disability has been much harder than coming out about my sexuality. And I'm just starting in my life to get sort of used to the idea of what I might have been masking all my life. But I also see how much I've masked my illness. So there's this constant battle of hiding how tired I am as well, or how dreadful I feel, and sort of putting on that face. The amount of times I've gone into a Zoom with the front of my hair done and the back in tangles, and a jumper and a jumper over my pajamas, as is actually the case this moment.
Yes.
So masking and coming out. I wondered if you could talk a little bit about those processes being similar and how difficult it is.
Absolutely. And yes, and as wearing a head covering today, also with my hair unwashed. So I think my story about this, I guess, is, a couple of years ago, I was actually doing, I don't know, a podcast or presentation, something, and I had done my makeup for it. And then afterwards, I went straight into some other meetings. And I must have got like 20 or 40 messages, people going, "Oh my God, you look amazing. Are you in remission? You look fantastic. I've never seen you look so good. You want a new treatment? What's going on?" And eventually, I was like, "Look, I can't handle like all these individual messages. I am actually working." So in the end, I said, "Look, I've just got makeup on. That's what it is. It's just that I'm wearing makeup. You don't normally see me wearing makeup." And people say, "Well, why don't you normally wear it?" And I said, "Well, because this took a long time and it took a lot of energy, and like I don't normally have the capacity to do that, so no." And I got a lot of pushback, and people say, "Well, I prefer looking at you. It's much." And eventually, I said, "Sorry. So your preference is that I literally paint over the pain and shadows in my face,
Yes,
and I sit in pain, but I look better to you, and I don't look sick, so you feel more comfortable. So I said, sorry, I have to sit here with this pain. The least you can do is sit here looking at me in this pain."
Yes.
The level of kind of pressure I got to continue to paint literally over the pain. I was like, this is fascinating, and you really need to sit with why you're asking me to do this. You're literally asking me to do more labor to hide how I am feeling so that you are more comfortable when you are with me.
Yes. And
Take a breath with that one.
Absolutely. So obviously when we first met, I met you. You're a psychotherapeutic counsellor, you're writing a book and so on. So the initial impression is your disability is not getting in your way, I suppose. I know this is ableist speak, but that's how I was brought up, and I'm still learning, relearning. But what's it been like, getting your qualifications, writing a book and so on? It hasn't been an able-bodied experience.
No. And as you said, of course, we are brought up with this language. So for me, when I was born with physical difference. I was incredibly premature. I was born 2.5 months early. I was 1 pound 13 ounces. So I grew up physically different. Like I had to have like special clothes made for me because I didn't fit standard clothes, etc. and, dealt with various issues, particularly with other people because of my physical stature and physical difference. And then I became, sick, chronically ill when I was 13. So it has kind of been a little while now. And sometimes people ask me, what it was, if I can remember not being chronically ill. And I'm like, when I was a child, that I'm not going to feel like that in my late 30s, even if I wasn't chronically ill, because I've lived all my adult life with chronic illness. But Miriam, I can't remember the question.
No, that's okay. I suppose I was
thinking
about
you the book.
You weren't able-bodied when you were writing the book or getting your qualification, and and I know at times there has been a sort of a struggle around the way you've been perceived. Perhaps you can tell us about some of the, how it's different for you to get your qualification and to write a book, to what might be presumed as Grace is okay, she doesn't have any struggles.
Yes, I mean, so there is this term in disability studies theory called supercrip. So this is an idea of where a disabled person compensates for being disabled. So we see this in film, for example. It's the visually impaired or blind detective who hears things that sighted people never hear, and so that's how they solve the case. Or the autistic person who actually has, a near-eidetic memory, and so they're portrayed as being very poor at interpersonal communication, but actually their mind is so amazing that they're able to do things that nobody else can do. But I'm hyperlexic, so, I do read incredibly quickly. But can you see how this is always put as making up for or kind of compensating for? It's always put as it's making up for this perceived lack or wrongness that is seen to exist. And, I think any of us, like you with your brilliantly successful podcast, are at risk of being made into a supercrip, of being said to be, oh, you're this person who's succeeding and thriving. And I don't believe I'm doing what I'm doing in any way to compensate for being sick and disabled. I did this stuff before I was chronically ill. I was always very driven. But as you say, it's, people will say to themselves, you haven't let disability hold you back. I'm thinking, right, sure. So I live with symptoms. I live with chronic pain. I have fatigue. I have, for example, hemiplegia, so I can't feel the right side of my body. I don't have sensation now. I have partial paralysis. So, I have dated, and then this is just, I've got like 15 diagnoses. This is just like a fraction of what I'm dealing with. But one of the biggest difficulties is, you said about reasonable adjustments, is like the attitudes of other people. So it's what we call stares, as in people staring at you, and stares as in the can't walk upstairs, the kind of physical stares. So often it's the difficulty of how other people treat me or respond to me that is a huge load that I could not happen. They could choose not to do that. Versus my body can't choose to magically have my neurons work and kind of be non-paralyzed. So you mean all the barriers, the structural barriers that were put in my way? The ones where, for example, without going into much detail, I wasn't allowed to ever join via telecall because it was seen as not secure. But at the moment COVID came, everybody went on telecall and it was magically sufficiently secure. So I don't mean to say this to sound bitter. This is a lot of disabled people's experiences, that many people were told things weren't possible, and then they watched them become possible for non-disabled people, and then with particular pain actually saw those then withdrawn when they were no longer needed for the majority of non-disabled people. So there is some particular wounds here for many disabled people around trust in institutions, around what was called like a reasonable adjustment or not. And I know that a reasonable adjustment is in the 2010 Equality Act language, but I actually don't call them reasonable adjustment myself. I call them access adjustments. And then some actually more interpersonal things. So for example, because I'm hyperlexic, sometimes people would ask me, like, often, like, what was the reading, what did the book say, what's your interpretation of this, kind of tell me what this means. Actually, interestingly, a lot about sexual and gender diversity. What does this mean, what does that mean, what does this mean, what does that mean? I remember one day I was lying on the floor because I was so exhausted, and I was like, you've got a smartphone.
Yes.
Why are you asking me? Because I didn't have a smartphone, so because I had no money. So I was like, you've actually got a smartphone. Why are you asking me? And actually what I started doing was saying, if I take the energy to explain to you, to teach you something that you're obviously finding valuable enough to ask me, then I'm not going to have enough capacity to be able to do everything I need today. So I still need to get myself safely home on a long commute. I need to have a meal, take my meds, wash, get ready for bed. Like, this is really mean. Do you want to pick which one I skip?
Yes. Yeah.
Or do you want to help me with one of those things? So do you want to help me to the train station? Do you want to buy me a meal so that I don't have to try and make a meal now? You know, because that's the reality of spoons. That's the reality of an energy envelope. And so I actually started saying, I will answer, but if you help me with something, because this is costing me something, I will need you to then help me be able to do it after. But sometimes it was a little bit, I think, like, basically, you're hyperlexic, you've read it all, it looks easy to us for you, just tell us.
Yeah.
But again, there's different kind of, I think one person I just remember saying, I said, like, they said it was easy for you, and I said, no, it's really not. I'm in a lot of pain. It's actually, I study very, very hard. It's very difficult. And the person just looked at me and went, and shook their head and went, no, I think you're perfect.
Yeah. She didn't want to. She didn't want to see, and there's something about how, certainly for me, that I mask or cover how difficult everyday things are, and then I started to, I suppose my coming out around my disability sometimes has felt a bit cack-handed because I've not, there isn't any support or representation to show you how do you say this. And so sometimes when I've just been exasperated, I felt that I get a bit people the shock tactic. So sometimes I'll say, I need to be really, really near a toilet, and I don't need the toilet to be occupied when I get there. And sometimes if you mention anything to do with poo or something, people don't want you to poo in the wrong place, so that respond.
Yes.
But it's I'm used to keeping those things fairly private, but I sort of had to think, what do I have to say for people to understand the behind the scenes thing of it's not that I don't want to have that office or various different things. It's that it would just be horrendous, and or people don't know, but every time I go out I have a spare set of clothes with me.
Yeah. This is me too, and this is very common. Oh my goodness, I just think it's disability culture to have like about 20 bags continuously. I've actually considered taking like one of the vintage trunks on a trolley and just kind of styling it out, just being like, yes, I literally have an entourage in a trunk, or just being okay with it. And it's interesting, as you say, I'm actually, I suppose for a long time, because I use a wheelchair, and because for a long time I looked so very visibly ill, it was very almost impossible for me to mask it. And so like I would have people coming up to me in the street going, are you going to live long? Are you terminal? And quite a lot. And did you know I look like every person that everybody knows who's died? I look like every single one of them, and they've all come and told me, all of them. And I think it's because I use a wheelchair and they just didn't look past the wheelchair. So it's just, you look like her because she's a wheelchair user. I can't possibly look like them all, surely. But yes, apparently I look like everybody's relative who's died, and they tell me about them all the time. But I'm joking, but we have a whole chapter on this in the book. And at first I was thinking, is a chapter overkill about all the comments you'll make about? And I was like, no, a chapter's not enough. We need more, because it's the comments and the things you get in the street. So I in some ways, like, I I don't hide, you know, I am kind of very clear about things. It's been interesting when I've been very, very sick, I've often tended to I wear a lot of dresses because I have endometriosis, so I don't want things digging in where I'm in pain. So I wear a lot of dresses. I often wear like headscarves a lot and kind of big sunglasses when I'm very sick. And so really often when that happens, people will come up to me and go like, oh my God, you look like a film star. I think it's kind of quite a vintage look as well. And I would say like, no, I'm very sick. And they say, you look amazing. Can I have like a selfie with you? You know, you look like a film star. And say, right, but I'm like this because I am in pain. And people but we're just so often, there's just an expectation, a pressure that we view ourselves through through productivity, through whether we can overcome. And it's seen as whether we're worth something, about whether we can push through and appear normal. And so we're often, either we are inspirational for doing basic things. So people have said to me, like, can I take a photograph of you? Like, I'm like, why? They're like, I've never seen someone like you on a train before. As though me just sitting on a train was something magical, as though it was somebody, I don't know, climbing a mountain or something. Or we're not trying hard enough, right? And this is what I call the bootstrap wellness narrative, and this is what we talk about it in the book. And it's this idea that, you know, if we can, it's such a harmful idea that if we just try harder, eat better, think more positively, then we can overcome. And we should, in this narrative, always be trying to kind of pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. Always should be trying. And that's often what we'll end up presenting to people. We'll kind of subtly try and demonstrate, oh, look at me doing the good thing. Oh, look at me, you know, mentioning my physio, mentioning my green drink or whatever, my new treatment, kind of trying to show I'm not a bad disabled person. I'm not one of those benefits fraudsters, malingerers, liars, you know, unreliable narrators who are unclear about their illness. And this is actually the next book I've been working on is actually called Mad Women and My Ancestors. And it's about how, of course, so I identify, so I'm like, no. I am a bad disabled person, right? I am happily with, you know, like so many times we are disbelieved about all of these things. We are pushed to do these bootstrap wellness narratives. And the thing is, it ignores the complexity of living with chronic illness, and it doesn't actually work. That's the problem. It doesn't work, as in it doesn't make you better.
No.
It just tends to make you worse. And then you feel like you failed individually because it worked for so-and-so on TV. So why doesn't it work for you? And even if you do try it, you don't get the level of acceptance. You have to always keep demonstrating more and more and more of your try hardness. But you're still disabled, you still need your accommodations, you still don't fit. So instead, I say, well, what happens if we actually recognize this is where my body is now? What if the real work isn't trying to be normal, is creating our own normal, a life that works for us as we are today? And how much energy do you reclaim when you aren't spending that energy masking, demonstrating, compensating, reassuring that you are everything you should be?
Yes, yeah. And I think, you know, I work self-employed therapist, and that's your main work, isn't it, Grace? I think that has really helped me massively, because I don't have to pull my weight, I suppose. I don't feel obliged to just, you know, to sort of justify my presence, that I'm a member of a team, that I'm, you know, and it's, you know, I've always worked hard like you know, I was driven before I was sick. I love my work. I absolutely love it, and I work probably what other people would say too much. But I'm quite liberated by this idea that I'm allowed to, you know, but other people are still going to make comments. And I think I've said to you before is that, you know, that people who are not sick very often feel that they can say to me, you know, oh, you need to well, you've said go out for a walk, but, there's also you need to pace better. And actually, my experience is that I can't work this out, but I could do something one day and I might feel better. Or I could do it and I might feel worse. Or I could do it exactly the same thing in the same circumstances and feel about the same. And sometimes it is just what it is, and it is just the illness. And you've said to me, and other people have said, with things like ME, chronic fatigue, for example, is that the battery will not charge up to 100. So people saying, rest, you need to rest more. If I'm waiting for my battery to be full before I do anything, which is, I've been told so many times, wait till you've got the energy before you do anything. I never have the energy, so I wouldn't do anything. So I have to choose to do it when perhaps it isn't a good idea, perhaps I am too tired, but just because I want to do it and I want to have a life.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And, I get those comments too. And at this point, I say, thank you. I'm delighted that you are volunteering to be my PA and help me with those things. I will see you at 8 a.m. Bring a mask and work gloves. You're going to be working hard. We're going to have such fun. We're going to have a great time. You're going to be tired by the end of it. We're going to have a good time. Because telling me to eat differently, pace better, rest more, I assume you are then volunteering to cover the tasks that I'm having to do in the meantime.
Yeah. Like
because if you're not, because you're clearly volunteering to pay for a makeup artist to come to my house every day, aren't you? Because if you aren't, who do you expect to be doing this? Who's going to be doing the essential tasks while I'm doing all this resting?
Yes.
Otherwise, you're just telling me to do something which I already know I need to be doing, but don't have the support or the resources to do. How is that helpful? That doesn't tell me something I don't already know. It's just putting more pressure on me for something that I can't necessarily do. And like sometimes we do choose. Again, it's your energy. If you wanted to go out and get drunk tomorrow, you could. It's up to you. Can't say I don't particularly enjoy it, but hey, you might. But if you wanted to go out tomorrow and use up all your energy doing something that you know is going to make you kind of feel worse for a few days or even for a long time, that's your choice as an independent adult. Again, there's like a childlikeness about treating chronically ill people. You need, and this idea again that it's all under our own power. That if we just did it carefully enough, that it would magically be okay. But that ignores the biological reality of these illnesses. It ignores what they're actually doing. And again, it treats us as though we're naughty children who are just doing too much and aren't listening properly. And if we just listen hard and just follow the rules properly, then everything will be okay. So that ignores, A, that's not what the illnesses are about, and B, we're living in a world in which that's not often possible. So unless somebody is willing to come and, so if I'm supposed to have, say, an extra hour's rest a day, fantastic, lovely, I'd adore that. Who's going to make all the meals? And of course, the other thing is, rest has to actually be restful. So if I just lie there for an hour, frantically stressed about the fact that there's no food, then it's not restful. It's just taking the attitude of rest. So actually, if I'm concerned about something, I maybe am better actually attending to it and then trying to rest a little bit afterwards, rather than forcing myself into the position of rest. This often sometimes we see with families with chronic illness, where a carer or a family member feels calmer when they see the chronically ill person, quote unquote, resting. But actually, if that chronically ill person is feeling full of energy and wants to do something, or is feeling stressed and wants to attend to something, just because the relative feels calmer when they see them in a position of rest and they think that's going to stop any relapse happening, that doesn't mean that their nervous system is calm. It doesn't mean that they're resting. It doesn't actually mean that they are feeling restful. They're just assuming the position.
So from this, you're actually saying that you are to be trusted to design your own day and your own.
It's a radical thought, isn't it?
It is interesting.
As a patient.
Exactly.
That I can be trusted with my own pacing, my own medication, and how so often we don't have enough. there's not enough money, there's not enough energy, there's not enough resources, there's not enough space, there's not enough options. For example, I'm looking at a new diagnosis at the moment, which I didn't want another one, Miriam, but there we go. And all the medications I'm looking at are going to have probably not very nice side effects, but we don't have an option of a medication without these side effects. I would just be picking between all not great options and picking which is the least problematic one for me at this time. So we often have not enough of things. So we're often making decisions that are, does this cause me a problem now, or will this cause me a problem in several years' time and I'm going to have to deal with it then? Unless we get more resources, capacity, medical options, adaptions, support, then we are going to be picking between bad options. There isn't a way that I could ever found, having done about every single thing you can imagine. I have done being the perfect patient with medically, I have done being the perfect patient with wellness, I have done the green drinks, I have done the enemas, I have done almost every single weird thing you can think of, everything that cured everybody else. I have done all of those things. I'm still sick. But as you say, it gives this idea that if we just did it right, it would work. And I call this, again, the compulsive miracle cure culture, that you're always supposed to be searching for a cure and demonstrating and showing your search, so that even if you're sick, you're showing that you're trying very hard to get back into quote unquote normal life. But actually, what if there just isn't enough of these things and we are having to make these choices, that there isn't enough energy in the day, the battery doesn't fully fill, and so sometimes we are going to have to act in ways that aren't ideal. But so is everyone when they go into overdraft and buy a tank of petrol. This is what we're living in these times.
Yes, and I'm thinking that part of your book, is it the subtitle, but there's something about making your own map. Can you tell us a little bit about how, this is your lived experience, and at this point in my sort of process of coming to terms with differences, new limitations, physical problems, this is still a new concept to me, to trust yourself and choose for yourself, and it's so interesting, because I'm sitting here listening to you and thinking, you're writing about illness or chronic illness is parallel to what I'm writing about in terms of coming out. So I'm saying in my book, you don't have to be good. You don't, one of the biggest problems is trying to make decisions about yourself that aren't selfish, but they are selfish and other people won't like it. And it's this trying to be a good person, trying to come out well, trying to not upset people by being where you're at, is actually one of the biggest problems. And this trusting ourselves, and I do think a lot of it has to do with being women as well, but being able to trust ourselves to make our own choices about our own life is, it's what I'm preaching in my work, but I'm only just with your help and support sort of making that a transferable to this. And we've got the same thing, which is that some of this is not our fault, because some of it's the culture that we're in, the context that we're in, the politics of the time, how we've been brought up, and some of it is just innate. It's just, that's just the shit that's happened. Some people might feel that they're born with that sexuality, or that fluidity and so on. So there's a lot of similarity, but I'm getting quite excited listening to you about it's like, oh, it's the same theory, but it's the same thing.
I'm excited to read your book, absolutely. And and sometimes there's not a perfect way to have the conversation, right? Because basically, if we never have, when we never see generally conversations about illness and disability, then of course it's going to be a difficult conversation. It's going to be a clumsy conversation because it's the first time you've had it. So of course you're not going to do brilliantly with it. It's like often when people who are socialized, for example, as women and femmes, can express anger, it's going to probably be kind of clumsy and terrifying because you're not good at it, and you're not skilled and nuanced at how you do it, not practiced. But then it terrifies you because you think, oh goodness, this means I'm awful at it, I better never do it again. Whereas actually it's more that it's new. So as you say, these are absolutely similar processes. So yes, in the book we have Living Well with Chronic Illness, write your own roadmap to healing in tough times. So it actually takes you through a process of creating your own roadmap. So, instead of with a lot of books, they've maybe got like and especially at the time in the Gregorian New Year, we have a lot of times of like, New Year, new you, kind of like a quote unquote diet plan or a lifestyle plan or whatever it is, plan to change things. So we say, what if it's not that we have quote unquote failed at the plans, at every lifestyle plan or healing plan that we tried that didn't work or that we couldn't continue with? What if we didn't fail? What if the cookie cutter plans failed us by not having the capacity to deal with the complexity of our real lives? So what happens if instead we design our own plan that fits our life and our reality? Because a lot of these things assume access. So they assume access to, like, the number of times I've had somebody say to me, can't you have a non-disabled friend or family member for you to do it? I said, okay, so you're picturing me as a singular disabled person, surrounded apparently by affluent non-disabled family and friends who are willing to charitably pitch in and help me get back on my feet. That's not my life. I live in a council estate in one of the poorest counties in Wales, where the healthy life expectancy is, I believe, 55 years old. Something like 10 miles away over the border, I believe that, I'm not sure I get these numbers right, the healthy life expectancy, I think, for women is into the 80s.
Yeah.
It's a very different economic catchment area.
This is real. I'm going to pause us for a moment, Grace, because I'd like us to take a little break and to come back after the break and explain a little bit more about what you're offering. It's been fantastic to really hear your lived experience, and I learned so much from you just talking. But it would be really useful, I think, for us to go into a little bit more about what you're offering your reader and our listeners today. So we'll take a break now and speak more after the break.
Are you coming out later in life? Are you partnered with someone who is? The Women with Women Conference has you covered. Meet like-minded people and hear from authors, therapists and specialists at a beautiful venue in Sheffield. The first Women with Women conference is set for June 2025, and with limited spaces, tickets are available at womenofsteel.co.uk. We'll see you there. This event is not open to men or straight people.
Welcome back after the break. I'm talking to Grace Quantock about her book, Living Well with Chronic Illness. And we've got a bit carried away there because we've spoken quite a bit about Grace's lived experiences, mine as well, and some of the ways that we have of thinking about disability, our perception of ourselves, other people's perception of us, and how difficult it can be to be othered in the world. So Grace has written a book to help us. Once this podcast has ended, you'll want to hear some more, I'm sure. So Grace, would you like to tell us about your book?
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. I'm so excited about it. So yes, my book is Living Well with Chronic Illness, and it's available in hard copy, in hardback, in e-version and audio version. And I also narrated the audio, which is really exciting and fun. And it is out now from your favorite retailer, whether that's an indie retailer or online. And also, when people get the book, I've got some freebies that go with them. So if you get it and then come to my website, gracequantock.com, you can go to the book page on there and you'll see a little form to put in your receipt number, and you'll get all the freebies. We've got waiting room meditations. These are audios to help you stay regulated while in the waiting room, waiting for a medical appointment. We've got procedural peace audios. So I've got audios that guide you through different medical procedures, like taking an MRI or having your blood taken. And then, of course, we've got the pre-appointment pep talks, which are for all the newsletter subscribers, and that's for my Healing in Tough Times newsletter. So for there, it is 10 days of audios that prep you for any medical appointment. So we help you what to pack, how to prep your emotions, how to get ready to talk to the doctor, how to get ready for any difficult outcomes. We talk you, it's the closest thing we could get to having me kind of in your pocket with you, talking you through the whole process. And of course, the biggest resource is the book that actually takes you through creating your own healing roadmap that works for you, that is optimized for your life, and that has your hopes and your needs at the center of it, rather than any kind of aspirational lifestyle or what the latest kind of fashion is on Instagram. Although, speaking of Instagram, I am also on probably your favorite social media platform. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube as Grace_Quantock, where I share regular tips and support.
And all that will also be in the show notes of this podcast as well.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that this is, taking that whole idea of you can trust yourself. You're an adult, you can trust yourself to know what you need. And that I think there's two sides to that, aren't there? Because some of the things we need we can't get, we can't have, and then some of the things that we need we can get, which might be a pep talk, or Grace holding your hand through a medical procedure via the resources that you're providing there, Grace. But with the things that we can't have, like the miracle cure, there are also things we can't have because of politics. And I'm interested, you call yourself an activist, a disability activist. I'm wondering if you could give us, a very short introduction to what's a disability activist? And what do you actually do when you're being active?
So I actually don't call myself a disability activist.
Oh, don't you? Okay.
Because I used to be like an eco-activist, and so we are very clear at the advice of my solicitors that I am no longer an activist.
Right.
Okay. We are specifically clear on that. Right. I'm a therapist and I'm a writer, but it's actually interesting. People often want to call me, of course, I suppose I do things. People often want to call me disability activist. I was actually going to be interviewed on the TV once. I was on the bus when I agreed, and I misheard, and I thought I was agreeing to write an article for a newspaper, and I was actually agreeing to be on Good Morning with Piers Morgan, and I hadn't realised. Was it the Good Morning or This Morning, whatever it's called? I was agreeing to go near Piers Morgan, and I hadn't realised because I couldn't hear, and I thought I was writing an article. Luckily, I was bumped off for Tony Blair, so thankfully I didn't actually have to meet Piers Morgan. But when I was talking to the production team, and they were saying, we'll put you down as a disability activist, I was like, right, but I'm here to talk about being in public life, like I also sit on boards and things. So I was like, and they said, we'll just put you down as a disability activist. And I said, well, why? Because I'm here to talk. I was there as part of this parliamentary review to talk about inclusion in politics and in public life and representation. And they had this insistence on it. And I thought, how interesting that you're trying to kind of pigeonhole me like that. That's not actually what I'm here for. Of course, it is like a form of making change. So what I do often hear from people, like when I'm doing work in kind of more formal settings outside of my client work, is you're the first disabled person that I've ever worked with, or the first disabled person that I've worked with at a senior level, or quite frankly, outside of being involved in charity. And at the start, I was kind of like, this is strange. I know there's a kind of a smaller amount of statistically disabled people who are able to work because of discrimination and because of the lack of access adjustments and adaptations, and because many disabled people have fragmented CVs because a lot of training and work doesn't adapt, and so you have to kind of stop and start a lot, and all of these things, as do carers also often as well. But when I looked into it in doing a lot of the reading, I found that, so for many disabled people, we are among some of the first generations in the UK to not live in group homes and asylums. It is really relatively recent. So I think the last asylum closed in North Wales in like the 60s. I'd have to double check the dates, but we're talking within, which also is within talking to, LGBT young clients. It's not, sometimes there's obviously, not to give details, but there's a wondering about why is it so difficult to talk to people of above my generation about this. I'm saying, right, you've got to understand, we have to remember the context of it's not to excuse it, but to have an awareness that for post-war generation, I grew up under Section 28. For many people, there was a huge pressure and a literal danger in talking about some of these things. My grandfather was once, they tried to give him electroconvulsive therapy, and he left scared and tried to kind of escape and not go back. We're talking about very recent times in which, and it happens still today. There are unfortunately still group homes where some people are held against their will, and we are seeing an increasing warehousing of disabled people as the council austerity and the cost of living crisis and the financial government difficulties hit councils, that they can no longer afford to support people in the community, is what they're saying. And so they're looking to kind of warehouse people and put people in group homes. Some people like group homes and want to live community. Some people really want to live with their carers, with their family. And the difficulty, of course, is when it's non-consensual. And so we're talking really recently. So for when my mother, for example, was growing up, people like me were still in group homes, were not in public. So she wouldn't have grown up seeing people like me on the street, in work, in the workplace, in a school. And so you've got a huge amount of unfamiliarity there. You've got, these really kind of recent difficulties, really recent institutionalization and lack of freedom. And I mean, if you go back, you're looking at, the Industrial Revolution really was what changed a lot of stuff for disabled people, because you've got a change from home working, where people could often work at the edges of the fields or work at home at their own pace, doing kind of cottage industries. We've now got mechanization. So what you've got is you've got to be able to work with the pace of the machine, the same pace as all the other workers. Yeah. At the same time, you've got a much greater cohort of disabled people, because there's no health and safety in the Industrial Revolution. You've got so many more people now becoming disabled. So this group became so large. This is a historian disabled. This is historian Colin Barnes' work, historian academic Colin Barnes' work around. You've got this larger group of disabled people, and then nowhere for them to work anymore. So this became an almost existential question of, will it be church or state? Will it be charity that looks after people under the church? Or will it be the state, and will it be hospitals and institutionalization? And there was this debate for a while about whose responsibility the disabled people were going to be. We actually ended up with the group homes, with the asylums, and then later group homes. And we're looking at, large amounts of the population who were locked away, who had exercise within the grounds. It was very, very incredibly othered. You've got, like my grandmother, who grew up hearing about quote unquote blind, deaf and dumb. So she now perhaps might say, I'm not deaf. So, right, grandma, deafness doesn't mean anything bad, but to her it might be alongside quote unquote senility, yes, quote unquote, losing her capacity, not being seen as an independent adult anymore. So we've all got these internalized ableisms and associations at different times, and it's how they pop up and how we kind of address and understand those, because we can't talk about living well, as you say, without acknowledging the systemic barriers. That it's not often people make it around individual challenges. And, in my work, basically what I don't want us to blame ourselves for the big issues that we can't control. Instead, I want us to say, like, you know what, it'd be much easier for me to exercise outside if the road wasn't full of potholes and if the pavement was smooth and not full of cracks, and also if I didn't get harassed. That would make my life a lot easier. Some things I can do, some things I can't do. So looking at not blaming myself for what I can't do, doing what I can do, but otherwise, if you tell me, oh, if you just think positively and you can do it, that'll work for a while, maybe, until I hit something that's structural. And then what? Do I blame myself for it? Instead of saying, well, okay, that's outside my control, so here's how I'm going to mitigate it. Here's how I'm going to navigate the fact that that's outside of my control. I'm going to find a way around the potholes.
And that's what that's what your book's doing. But what about the grief and the anger? What is about this being the state of things? It's like, yes, there's that mobilization which we use our grief and anger to get us to create this map that you're talking about. What about that bit before we mobilize, when we're just feeling like, I mean, I'm still in shock, and you told me this a few months ago about that there are still people locked away for no other reason than that they're disabled, and that they're, that consent hasn't been part of the process.
So this is particularly like young autistic people, some people with learning disabilities, what's considered, very, very quote unquote difficult behaviour. I mean, the people with learning disabilities in the UK have an average life expectancy of 20 years less than a non-learning disabled person, and the research suggests this is down to medical negligence or medical problems. This isn't due to comorbidities. This isn't due to kind of any other issue. This is because of the lack of equitable medical treatment. We're looking at sometimes, especially, there's been reports in the BBC, for example, about young people who are neurodivergent, who have perhaps mental health issues. Then we're getting into the whole kind of, carceral mental health treatment issue, which obviously is bigger than we can talk about today. But yes, unfortunately, it's not a thing of the past. Frances Ryan, the fantastic journalist in The Guardian, who just won an amazing award, she did a great article about the issue in Bristol about disabled people being put back into care homes without their consent, some even without their knowledge because they haven't been informed. There was this was just last year, I think, there was a massive national campaign and it was actually overturned. That was only with the support of The Guardian and with the support of the national campaign. Otherwise, people were facing being put in an institution, people with all sorts of impairments and disabilities, because the council did not have, the council's argument was they did not have the funds to support people in the community. So unfortunately, what we call warehousing is a very real risk, particularly in these times.
So I'm going to add another emotion in there. I said, what about our anger and our grief and fear as well? Well, what about the, I know that the illnesses are not psychological, all in our head, but what do you offer in terms of, shock, anger?
So we have a chapter where we go through what we call the emotional forest. Right. So going through all these different emotions, we talk about how we process them, how we understand them, ways that we work alongside them and through them and with them. And you said a little bit about trusting your body, and I just want to really acknowledge that while we of course really encourage that, there are aspects in which potentially we feel we can't trust our bodies. It's very difficult perhaps with dissociation or trauma in the body. A lot of the book deals with this, that we can't tune into the body, that we're in too much pain, so we can't check in, that we don't, perhaps we're neurodivergent, and perhaps like me, you don't get your interoception, the signals you get from your body aren't as kind of immediate as somebody might expect or hope. Perhaps some people of course feel their body has betrayed them, or they feel they can't trust their body because, as you described, one day you can do something and the next day you can't do something. So for me, it's less about this kind of lovely idea of fully trusting the body, and instead for me it's more about looking, where have I been told that I need to hand my power over to this authority? So this author with their technique, which has worked for them, and so they tell me it's going to work for me. I mean, what I'm trying to do is guide you through your own understanding of what you have learned in your experience with your body. This isn't just that I did this for me. This isn't a book where I'm saying I got better and you can too if you follow my 5-step plan. I'm not better. I'm still sick.
Yeah.
And this is the work I've done with, hundreds of thousands of client hours over many, many years around how we unpack all of the shoulds, all of the to-dos, all of the pressure, all of the expectations. That's what we're unpacking to start to understand what really matters to us. Because people often have an image of wellness where they might say, it's like doing yoga or being outside in a walk on a mountain. Well, that's great if you love that. But maybe for you, wellness feels like playing video games with your friends.
Yeah.
In which case, let's work towards that. Or maybe wellness is, reading a lesbian romance novel, or doing some dressing up, exploring your gender presentation that day. It's about what matters to you, not about the aesthetic of wellness.
Yes.
It's about figuring out how it works in your life and what your needs are, rather than what we're told wellness could or should look like.
Yes. So it's in person-centered terms, it's the internal locus of evaluation, not the external. So as is very typical of you and of me, we've filled up our time and spilled over. We're both very passionate about this. I think it'll be fantastic listening for people, but I think it's time that I ask you really what you would say to our listeners who are listening now, and that they can go off and look at some of the other resources. But I do want to say I've already invited you back on because there's so many things that so many paths we haven't gone down. So if there's somebody listening now and maybe they've been feeling unwell for a long time, or maybe they feel relatively new to what am I, about 8 years in, but I feel really still quite new to this whole thing. I'm wondering what your words to them would be.
Absolutely. And first just acknowledge that I'm still learning. We're all still learning. I'm not trying to set myself up as any kind of authority as much as somebody who's learning alongside as we all are. And it's such an important thing. And in the book, you'll find so many references, other authors that I quote or other thinkers, because I'm just so glad to be part of such a wider community of disabled thinkers and activists and people who are doing this work and finding this new way forward. So for people who might be listening like that, what I really want to say is just that your struggle is valid and that you are not alone. In many ways, the systems we navigate were not built for bodies like ours, but that doesn't mean we're wrong or broken. And it's okay not to have all the answers right now. Living with chronic illness isn't about pushing through or overcoming. It doesn't have to be that. It can be about finding ways to exist, to resist, and to live within the complexities of our realities. And remember, you're not failing if you're not, quote, beating your illness. You're succeeding, you're being alive and present every time you honor your needs, set a boundary, or make it through a difficult day. Your worth isn't tied to your productivity or your health status. You're valuable because you exist and because you are you. So keep doing what works best for you. See if you can connect with others who understand. If it's possible to keep challenging the narratives that tell you to bootstrap your way to their version of wellness. Your journey is yours, and it's okay if it doesn't look like anybody else's. You are already worthy and already enough, exactly as you are.
Thank you so much for joining us this episode, Grace, and I look forward to our next chat.
Thank you, me too. Thank you so much to you and the listeners.
Grace believes that we can live well in the midst of all this without miracle cures or aspirational makeovers. It led me to reflect on how I apologise for my disabilities. I'm so sorry that my pain might inconvenience you. So I'm wondering, does this approach resonate with you? Does it apply to your issues, to depression or stress? I'm going to be inviting Grace back soon, along with other authors on these topics. Do email me or Grace with your comments. All our details are in the show notes. Thank you for listening to Women of Steel, created and hosted by me, Miriam Grace, psychotherapist at Blue Skies. If you'd like to know more about my work as a therapist and writer, you can follow me on social media. Please take a look at the show notes for information and contact details. And in the meantime, be kind to yourself.